Hey heroes, welcome to another amazing episode of History of the Marvel Universe. The topic of this video was voted on by Patreon supporters. If you would like to help decide what topics get covered on the channel, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. And if you have suggestions for topics for patrons to vote on, then let me know in the comments below. Lemar Hoskins was born in Chicago, Illinois, where he was presumably raised alongside his brother Leon. After dropping out of high school, Lemar decided to enlist in the U.S. Army. During his time in boot camp at Fort Bragg, he bunked with a man named John Walker. Initially, Lemar was somewhat wary, with John being a white man from the South, but when it became clear that Lemar's skin color wouldn't be a problem, the two quickly became close friends. They served together for 4 years alongside two other men, Jerome Johnson and Hector Lennox, but grew restless during peacetime. However, it seemed they would have an opportunity for other exciting ventures when they were approached by a representative from a man called the Power Broker. He gave each of them a card advertising a strength augmenting process. Lemar, John, Jerry, and Hector all decided to travel to Los Angeles to check it out. And sure enough, after undergoing the Power Broker's treatment, all 4 men were endowed with superhuman strength, durability, agility, and stamina. Now, most people who did this paid their debts by participating in the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation. Lemar attempted this under the name Lightning Lemar and faced off against Demolition Dunphy in his very first match. Suffice it to say, due to his relative inexperience in the ring, it did not go well for Lemar. But he and John were soon approached by a man named Ethan Thurm, who offered to be their agent for independent exploits. And John had an idea about becoming a patriotic superhero in the vein of Captain America. He crafted the costumed identity of the Super Patriot and convinced Lemar to be one of his bold urban commandos alongside Jerome and Hector. The bold urban commandos were also known as the Buckies in reference to Captain America's young sidekick during World War II, Bucky Barnes. Initially, the Super Patriot was the focus, with Thurm booking him several shows where he performed as guest stars for touring rock groups. Thurm came up with the idea of using the bold urban commandos as heels to bolster the Super Patriot's reputation. While John worked over a crowd by claiming that Captain America had become outdated, Lemar and the others posed as gun-toting Cap supporters and rushed the stage. Of course, the Super Patriot defeated the bold urban commandos in a scripted battle, but neither he nor Lemar were particularly happy about the whole scenario. When Steve Rogers, the real Captain America, began investigating this, Thurm sent the Buckies to attack him. And despite being outnumbered by stronger opponents, Rogers' experience allowed him to come out on top. Lemar and the others were subsequently instructed to further tarnish Cap's reputation by harassing foreigners and immigrants while still pretending to be his supporters. It should be noted that in these earliest appearances, the so-called Buckies were portrayed as distinctly villainous and not particularly educated or literate, but this was quickly toned down, and official handbooks from only a few years later have rated all of these men as possessing average human intelligence as opposed to having any notable impairments or deficiencies, so I would presume that Lemar's behavior in these scenes was largely an act. Either way, this may have been one of the factors contributing to the subsequent decision from the Commission on Superhuman Activities to reinforce the idea that Captain America was meant to be a government operative and not a free agent. Unwilling to sacrifice his autonomy to governmental authority, Rogers turned over his shield and quit. And as we've mentioned on the channel before, the one tapped to be his replacement was John Walker, although this change was not announced to the public. Initially, John told Lemar Hoskins, Jerome Johnson, and Hector Lennox that he wouldn't leave them behind. However, Lemar was the only one of the 3 to meet FBI approval, and so the CSA ordered him to drop Johnson and Lennox along with his manager. And so while John became the new Captain America, Lemar filled the role of Bucky, even wearing the original's costume. This was during a time when James Barnes, the original Bucky, was still thought to be dead following his disappearance at the end of World War II. And I will also point out here that yes, there are definitely unfortunate implications with a large African-American man using the codename Bucky, but we'll address that in a bit. During this time, Lemar worked on completing his unfinished studies and received combat training alongside John with some help from the Guardsmen. If you aren't familiar with them, they normally operated as security for a supervillain prison called the Vault, using Stark-designed armors. It wasn't long before Lemar and John were contacted by Ethan Thurm once again, but this time he wanted to blackmail money out of them by threatening to reveal Captain America's secret identity to the public. Lemar and John ended up posing as guardsmen to scare him into silence. Sometime later, John was ordered to infiltrate the racist right-wing domestic terrorist group, the Watchdogs. And to help accomplish this, Lemar posed as an agent for a pornographic magazine, so that John could attack him out of costume and get the Watchdogs' attention. While this plan worked in getting John into the group, Lemar was captured and the Watchdogs intended on killing him. While John left his friend to complete his mission, resulting in several arrests, Lemar broke free and saved himself. Following this, the two continued to work together on various government-sanctioned field missions as Captain America and Bucky. While John wielded Cap's traditional vibranium shield, Lemar initially didn't have much weaponry of his own. After raising objections, he was issued a replica of Cap's original triangular shield made out of solid adamantium. Eventually, the pair were sent to help clean up a situation at the Vault, where an African-American guard questioned Lemar's use of the name Bucky. The guard explained that the term Buck had been used as a derogatory name for black men, causing Lemar to rethink his costume and moniker. Now, I don't normally talk about behind-the-scenes, out-of-universe stuff on the channel, but I would like to take a second to step back and talk a little bit about how this situation came to be. It has been reported that when writer Mark Gruenwald decided to make Lemar Hoskins the new Bucky, he had no idea that Black Buck was a racial slur usually levied at larger black men. But the one who did notice this problem was Dwayne McDuffie, who today is remembered as a legend of the industry and one of the more influential African-American writers in comics. According to his colleague Gregory Wright, McDuffie was hesitant to talk to Gruenwald about the issue, but Wright insisted. After McDuffie calmly explained his views, Gruenwald was apparently horrified, and the two men hashed out a way to rectify the situation. And so, back to the story, in-universe, Lemar spoke to the commissioner of the CSA who approved a rebranding. With a new original costume, Lemar Hoskins took the name Battlestar. While his true identity would remain a government secret, Battlestar made his public debut at a rally addressing the entire nation. This was the same rally in which it was announced to the American people that the then-current Captain America was not the original. However, this event was interrupted by the arrival of Hector Lennox and Jerome Johnson, now calling themselves left-winger and right-winger respectively. The two former bold urban commandos revealed the new Cap's identity to the world, but were stopped before they could do the same to Battlestar. Following this, Lemar and John were sent on missions to apprehend mutants who failed to register their identities with the government. And Battlestar quietly wondered if this Mutant Registration Act was ultimately just another form of government oppression against a new minority. While escorting one prisoner, they were attacked by a group of mutants called the Resistance. The captive mutant, Quill, escaped with the Resistance, but when John and Lemar reported in, they were immediately ordered to help deal with a situation in Washington involving Viper and the Serpent Society. With business being left unfinished and being ordered around from place to place, Battlestar began to grow annoyed by the way he and John were being used by the CSA. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers had donned a black costume and was operating outside of the law as the Captain. When Battlestar traveled to Washington, he encountered one of Rogers' accomplices, the Demolition Man, who he'd previously met as Demolition Dunphy. Due to a misunderstanding, the two fought again, but Battlestar either didn't recognize or didn't remember his masked foe. In either case, this time it was Lemar who was victorious. Following this, Lemar and John were tasked with taking in Rogers himself, but this task was interrupted when John's parents were abducted by the Watchdogs. John went off on his own to try and rescue them, but ultimately failed. He was subsequently suspended from active duty, and Lemar intended on talking to the commission, but before he could give Chairman Rockwell a piece of his mind, he was called away for another mission, this time alongside the government-sponsored mutant team Freedom Force. After that, Lemar successfully completed his unfinished high school education and earned his diploma. At the same time, John continued to grow more sullen and distant. He even started growing more violent, and unbeknownst to Lemar, John attacked and tried to kill left-winger and right-winger. The whole situation started coming to a head when the two men were sent to tackle Carl Morgenthau, better known as the Flag Smasher. After defeating John and holding him at gunpoint, Flag Smasher demanded that Battlestar bring him the real Captain America. While the CSA would have been fine with leaving John to die, Lemar defied their orders by meeting with Rogers and telling him what happened. And so Battlestar then fought side by side with the Captain against Flag Smasher's terrorist group Ultimatum. In the end, Walker was rescued, but the CSA intended on removing him from the position of Captain America. Lemar told Johnny that he would stick with him and that the two could strike out as independents, but John actually resented his friend for bringing in Rogers, insisting that he could have handled the situation himself. Now, there was a lot more going on behind the scenes, like how the chairman of the CSA, Douglas Rockwell, was secretly being influenced by the Red Skull, who had transferred his mind into a clone body of Steve Rogers. But like most people, Lemar was never aware of that, and the chairman was ultimately killed by the Skull when he outlived his usefulness anyway. The important thing for today is that following Rockwell's death, CSA member Dr. Valerie Cooper took over his position. In her first act as chairperson, Cooper reinstated Rogers as Captain America. However, at the ceremony where he handed over the shield, Walker was seemingly shot and killed right in front of Lemar. The gunman, one of the Watchdogs, was himself fatally shot almost immediately afterwards by the supposedly deceased Scourge of the Underworld. When Lemar and Cooper later attempted to retrieve Walker's body from the morgue, it seemed to have gone missing. Cooper later claimed that Walker's sister Kate had taken the body for cremation, but Battlestar suspected that a conspiracy was afoot. Despite Cooper's attempts to keep him there, Lemar decided to quit working for the CSA so that he could search for the truth. His first idea was to talk to John's sister himself, but found her home abandoned. Next, he examined the shooter's equipment and came to the conclusion that it didn't look like authentic Watchdog gear. Convinced that something was amiss but out of ideas, Lemar decided to confront Valerie Cooper once again, and she finally admitted that the CSA had faked Walker's death and given him a new identity so that he could continue to operate in secret. However, she was unwilling to give any further details, leaving Lemar frustrated that John never contacted him about this. Seeking new allies in the superhero community, Battlestar decided to introduce himself to Sam Wilson, the Falcon, and found him in the midst of a scuffle with members of the Serpent Society. Seems Lemar made a good first impression in helping Sam defeat the villains. Following this, he continued to quietly investigate Walker's whereabouts with some help from his brother Leon. His search eventually led him to the headquarters of the Avengers West Coast Division in California. After a stakeout that lasted several days, Lemar finally found the man he was looking for, an Avenger called U.S.Agent who wore the black costume that Rogers donned when he was simply called the Captain. although the way that Lemar got his attention was to fire and miss with an explosive sniper rifle. Despite everything that happened, Lemar was happy to see the man he thought was his best friend. However, U.S. Agent insisted that he wasn't John Walker and even attacked Battlestar after he mentioned the death of his parents. During the scuffle, Lemar managed to pull aside the agent's mask, and indeed he didn't quite look like John. Soon after, the fight was interrupted by the arrival of two more Avengers, Iron Man and Wonder Man. Battlestar agreed to leave peacefully, but warned them that U.S. Agent seemed unstable. Shortly after that, Lemar got a call from his brother who told him that his old manager, Ethan Thurm, wanted to talk to him again. It seems that Thurm was mostly concerned for his own life since his last client had been kidnapped, and soon after Battlestar arrived, he was attacked by a group of villains called the Power Tools. By holding Thurm hostage, the Tools were able to abduct Lemar as well. Bound by adamantium shackles, Battlestar was held captive alongside various wrestlers from the Unlimited Class Federation. It seems the Power Tools were working for none other than Curtis Jackson, the Power Broker. You see, what Lemar didn't know when he agreed to undergo the Power Broker's strength-enhancing treatment was that the process often failed, instead leaving the subject misshapen. Earlier, while being hunted by this scourge of the underworld, Jackson subjected himself to this treatment, but was left too large and bulky to be able to move under his own strength. And so he began abducting others who had also been enhanced so he could test a depowering process before applying it to himself. And sure enough, Battlestar proved to be the first successful de-augmentation. Despite his weakened state, Lemar attempted to escape by taking Jackson's chief scientist, Carl Malice, hostage. Fortunately for him, U.S. Agent had followed him from the Avengers compound and leapt in to help. By threatening the machinery that Jackson needed to return himself to normal, Lemar and the U.S. Agent convinced Malice to restore everyone they depowered. And although Malice kept his side of the bargain, U.S. Agent destroyed his machine before it could be used on Jackson. After that ordeal, John Walker finally confided in Lemar, telling him that he'd gone undercover with a new face and a new identity as Jack Daniels, U.S. Agent. However, he did question why Lemar continued to say that his parents had been killed. Lemar realized that John, or rather Jack, seemed sincere and theorized that his memories had been altered to make him more stable. Feeling that his old friend deserved the truth, Lemar brought Jack to the graves of Caleb and Emily Walker, allowing him to grieve. Of course, Lemar accepted that he and John couldn't work together while he was undercover and looked for a new purpose. Sometime later, he learned that a mercenary group called the Wild Pack had been hired to protect televangelist Donald Smithfield, who had earned the ire of the Watchdogs due to his apparent support of abortion rights. Having fought the Watchdogs before, Battlestar offered his services to the Wild Pack's leader, Silver Sable. He was also shocked to learn that she already knew his secret identity. Sable was hesitant to accept outside help, but Battlestar impressed her by helping to take down the assassin Gatling. Following this, Lemar Hoskins was offered a proper place on the team and officially became a member of Silver Sable's Wild Pack. However, he did find himself at odds with his racist squad mate, Doug Powell. The situation was only made worse when Powell's cousin, Samantha, developed a crush on Battlestar. Official handbooks have perhaps erroneously called her his sister, but Samantha refers to Doug as Cuz in the actual book. In either case, Lemar was more interested in the Somali mutant Lightbright. She ended up joining the Intruders, another team managed by Silver Sable. During Lemar's time with the Wild Pack, he encountered villains like Cathode, Viper, Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, the Cyber Warriors, Venom, and a terrorist organization known as the Genesis Coalition. Throughout all of this, Battlestar became one of Silver Sable's more trusted employees and even led the Wild Pack on several missions. Years later, after his lengthy stint with the Wild Pack and subsequently falling into obscurity, Battlestar resurfaced as a member of the underground resistance who opposed the Superhuman Registration Act during the first superhero civil war. After the SHRA was repealed, Battlestar aided an elite mercenary squad responding to a distress signal at the energy research facility Project Pegasus. What they found there were zombified clones of the other dimensional heroes known as the Squadron Supreme. For the full story there, you can check out the aptly titled miniseries Marvel Zombies Supreme. Lemar subsequently joined Howard the Duck and Dum Dum Dugan on a mission to prevent an invasion of Nazi zombies from another dimension. That story is called Marvel Zombies Destroy if you want to read that one for yourself. More recently, Lemar returned to the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation for a special one-night-only charity event where he had a long-awaited rematch with Demolition Dunphy. But when the pair noticed UCW President Jay McMahon attempting to steal the charity money, Battlestar and Demolition Dunphy fought side by side to stop him and his lackeys. And so at the end of the night, both men stood victorious and everybody in the crowd had a great time. And that's all I've got for you this week, but if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. Also, feel free to let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in the comments. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. There's my Patreon page, where for $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks, and my Twitch channel where I stream every weekend at 2:30 Eastern Time. But that's all I've got for you today, so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!